Thank you very much, Mr. President, for permitting me to enter the debate on this motion brought by Senator Wade Mark. Mr. President, this motion, I want to make it clear, is not brought to diminish the importance of the Dragon Gas deal. It is not brought to criticize the progress that has been reported to the nation in terms of securing what is and what I think we can all agree is important to the country of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, it is because of the importance of this deal and how important it is to the lives and livelihoods of every citizen of this country is the reason why the motion is brought. Because as citizens and as a responsible opposition, it is part of our duty to bring forth concerns and to try to obtain information where there may be a lack of clarity. Now, the debate began on the 28th of November, and several key areas were raised by all members who spoke on both the opposition and independent bench. And the value of this motion is evident because I was not here on that day. I was out, and Senator Gopi Singh sat in my place on that particular day. And I looked at the debate, and I noticed that he gave way to the minister to answer questions, to clarify certain issues. And that is, in essence, what we are here to do, to seek clarification. And it is I think it is quite telling, and it validates the importance of this motion in this Senate, the fact that we were able to get some of that information. But as the information comes forth and as new developments take place, again, I think it is only fair to expect a responsible opposition to raise issues and to highlight certain things that are developing. Because you see, this Dragon Gas deal is not two people sitting in a room negotiating a simple contract. There are many, many, many factors at play. And particularly with this deal, there are many variables that can affect this deal that are simply outside the control of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So when you talk about a deal that requires a $100 million investment in a pipeline, something that you're reading in different local and international journals and newspapers and reputable news sources about, first gas being realized in 2 years' time. But at the same time, you're hearing that the supplemental, I don't know if that's the correct word, but the supplemental license that allows us to make cash payments will expire in October 2025. One of the important clarifications sought by Senator Gopi Singh, obtained through the debate on this motion. It is only reasonable that we continue to explore all of the variables and seek from the government, as something which I do not believe to be unreasonable, but seek not only the clarification at this point in time, but seek periodic updates. And that's what the motion is essentially about. As I sat here today and we spent some time paying tribute to those who, I would say, paved the way for us to be here today, I remember, and I always say, that I think freedom of information was one of the most spectacular accomplishments of the Basiu Pandey administration. Freedom of information, and I heard my senior one time in court, because we do a lot of matters involving freedom of information, challenging the reluctance of state agencies to give information. And I remember he described it as a piece of legislation that opened up the filing cabinets within every nook and cranny of every government ministry and gave citizens access to information. And access to information, and the importance of access to information by everybody, from the doubles vendor to the energy executives who all down at the energy conference there at the waterfront today, is important, and we must never diminish the importance of access to information by citizens who can make informed decisions, because the decisions taken by a government who are the trustees of our resources on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, we must have information in order to judge those decisions. I liked literature when I was in school, and one of the things that my literature teachers always told me is that you must paint the scene, set the scene when you're answering a question or when you have to describe something. And if we look at the scene that's playing out around us, both historically as well as what is happening now and what we may anticipate and what we can see developing in the very near future, it is very important to this debate, and it's important for us to evaluate and to make judgments about the Dragon gas deal. So let's set the scene. We've had quite a rapid decline in gas production in this country. We've had a number of plants sitting idle in Point Lisas. It has caused immense hardship, and it has caused I would say the decimation of a whole portion of our society. Again, we paid tribute today to Mr. Faisal Karim, former minister. And you know, one of the things that pushed the development of central Trinidad and the move away, and I heard one member opposite recalling the talk about, from cutting cane to flying plane. And it was part of the vision of moving the children who would have been brought up in agriculture and so on to learn skills and to learn technical vocational skills so that they could work in the energy sector, so that they could work in Point Lisas. And that provided, it created a whole lift for a generation of children in this country. And so many of them have lost their jobs. When Senator Mark piloted this motion, he gave all of the statistics about how many people were once employed in our energy sector, in our petrochemical sector, and those numbers have simply plummeted. So that is part of the context, and it sets the context of why this deal may be important, because if we do not revitalize our energy sector, we will simply have plants laying idle. We all know what happened with Atlantic. It cost NGC an investment so risky. I think it was some 280 million or something like that. An investment so risky that they had their board of directors seeking to indemnify themselves just to keep Train 1 alive. Why? Because of a gas shortage. Trains 2, 3, and 4, I don't know where they are now. I think they're still just going along, limping somewhere. They're just there. So that is the scene in which we are operating. The need for us to monetize this deal and to get gas here and to produce our petrochemical sector to be revived and so on cannot be underestimated. We have to recognize that we have a lot riding on this deal and its viability. So that in the absence of us being able to point to any other significant industry in Trinidad and Tobago emerging as becoming a leader, much of our prosperity as a nation depends on oil and gas. And so our ability to develop our human capital, our ability to deal with the most pressing issue, which is crime, our ability to maintain the social safety net, whatever it is, we have to revive our energy sector. And when the announcement was made subsequent to this motion, an announcement was made around the 21st or 22nd of December that the deal had finally been signed off. And all of the rhetoric and the little catchy phrases, the dragon can dance and all of that, and it's great and everything is happening, we still have questions coming out of how this deal will be done. And the reason, again, I say that freedom of information, and whether you get it through the court, whether you get it through legislation, whether you get it through this parliament, is important. It's because of how important the deal is. And we cannot depend on non-disclosure agreements to not give information to allow people to make informed decisions, because it's not just about an election and what citizens think and so on, but it's about investors. We want to attract investment into Trinidad and Tobago, so people who are evaluating our performance as an economy, people who are going to be evaluating how, what they can see in terms of the economic development of Trinidad and Tobago will want more details about this particular deal. And I mentioned earlier that there are, in fact, a lot of variables that would truly, to some extent be outside of our control that could affect the viability of this deal. And I know others would have mentioned it. But the fact is this: if we have a 2-year supplemental license to be able to allow us to make cash payments, you would recall that January last year when we got permission from the United States to be able to have our to engage in this deal with Venezuela and to avoid what we call secondary sanctions, no cash payments were allowed. And so without those cash payments being allowed, we had no particular clear path forward to actually being able to engage in this deal with Venezuela, to buy the gas coming out of the Dragon field, getting it to Shell's platform, I think it's called Hibiscus, and how are we going to do it? We have the technical know-how here. We have companies, they say Shell and NGC are going to be the major players in this. We still don't have the details as to specifically what role each company will play. NGC, again, is not a private company. It is a state-owned enterprise owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Its decisions, its investments, its management and so on is all, it has to be that people have clarification as to the role that NGC will play in this deal. When the deal was announced and finally concluded, or as being concluded in December, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy alluded to the fact that PDVSA would now play less of a role and that NGC would be more fully involved in the value chain. And I remember hearing that and thinking to myself, well, what does that mean? Now, I am not a person who has ever worked or has any experience in the oil and gas sector, but there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just like me who don't know what that means. Maybe there's some energy executive, as I say, down the road there who might understand and who might have the details. But why not clearly set out for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, from the doublesman to the energy executive, set out what is the role of a state-owned by me, you, and everybody in this room and outside there, of a state-owned enterprise in this deal. What is the risk? What is the financial exposure of NGC versus, for example, a private company, Shell? So let us find that, let us find a way, whilst protecting whatever may be protected by an NDA, and for whatever reason, I've found the reasons being put forward for why it is more information cannot be given to be quite, quite wishy-washy and really not holding much water. But because I read somewhere where the minister talks about, there are many players in Venezuela seeking to negotiate deals and so on. And so if Venezuela are negotiating with us, they wouldn't want the details of our agreement to be made public because they have other negotiations. Is that really justification for depriving the people of Trinidad and Tobago about details of a deal this big that could affect our entire future? Is that really justification for not telling us how a state-owned enterprise will be spending the money that they hold on behalf, as trustees on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? And that, to me, warrants, so the government must find a way. They must find a way to be able to be accountable. Be accountable. And accountability and transparency must never be feared. And there's too much fear of accountability and transparency with this government. There's too much fear of giving citizens information. And I don't know if it is because they feel that citizens having information would, put them out of a job, but I find that time and time again, not just when it comes to the energy sector, not just when it comes to anything, but to anything in particular, but in general, there's a lot of secrecy around the way that this government undertakes projects and undertakes its work on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and that, to me, is unacceptable. Because we have this 2-year window, and that's the other thing, we have a 2-year window, but we can't expect first gas, according to some reports, from this project for 2 years, and we only have a 2-year window to actually make cash payments. What happens when it comes up when it expires and we have to try to seek to renew it? There are many things that can happen between now and then that can affect the United States giving us further permission to make cash payments. There are many things that can affect the United States giving us permission to be able to continue with this deal, altogether. And I'm hearing before it gets off the ground, we're asking questions. Well, that's what you do. That's what you do to avoid another WGTL scandal. Yes. Set the stage and the context. The context is your government has made very poor decisions on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly when it comes to the energy sector. So asking questions before something gets off the ground is a good idea, not a bad idea. It's a good thing. Before you pump $100 million into building a pipeline to find out in 2 years before you even get the gas if you will be able to continue with the deal.
176.
The United States has an election this year, in November of this year. The former administration of the United States, their parting shot when they were demitting office was to impose a host of sanctions on Venezuela. That was the parting shot of President Trump, to grant allow Venezuelan persons in exile to remain and to hit them with every financial sanction that they could have found. So if the United States has a change of administration by November of this year, and you cannot divorce yourself, you cannot sit in this parliament and say, we have an NDA and we know what we're doing, and why are you all crying down this thing before it even gets off the ground, and so on, and divorce yourself from the reality of what is happening outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And this government cannot be so narrow-minded, and they cannot expect, and I don't know why it is they seem to be happy if people take a narrow-minded approach to evaluating projects like this. But what we need is to make the information and draw the information to the attention of the public so that people are aware of all of the factors that are taking place outside of this room, outside of the cabinet, outside of Trinidad and Tobago, that could affect this particular deal, and that could have severe ramifications for the lives and livelihoods of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. So we have that issue. The other thing is that when the United States decided to actually grant and ease the sanctions on Venezuela and permit them to engage in this contract with us, it was because of what the US backed what they call the unitary platform in Venezuela. They had some discussions, and they sat down and they came up with some sort of an accord. I think they met in Barbados, actually. And again, the details of that agreement are very relevant to us. Because if that agreement doesn't come through, and if the current government in Venezuela, the ruling party, does not actually hold up their end of the bargain, then what happens to our Dragon gas deal? And so, for the benefit of members of the public, because I'm sure the government knows, even though they don't want to talk about it, for the benefit of the members of the public, I would tell you some of the terms. I think it was a 12-point plan that the unitary platform, the opposition in Venezuela, reached with the Maduro government, brokered, I think, by some European mediators. And some of those things include not just that they would have free and fair elections in the latter half of 2024, but that they would allow international observers, that they would engage in the updating of their electoral lists to ensure that you had, free and fair elections and the persons were registered and there was no tampering and so on. That you would have balanced media coverage, because if the actual free and fair media is not something that is, people don't accept that the media in Venezuela are free and fair. So all of these variables are things that are agreed to, and it is on the basis of that agreement that the United States has decided to give a partial relaxing of the sanctions. Are we, as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to peg all our hopes on a deal that can fall through if you have balanced media coverage of elections and so on in Venezuela? Are we to peg all our hopes on the fact that Biden is going to win the next election and that they would not have a change of administration and that a new US president is not going to come and say, and put in a whole host of sanctions again? Are we to simply accept that we now have this license in our hand for 2 years to allow us to make the cash payments and to exploit this deal, and Shell and NGC is on board, but we are not actually considering all of the other developments taking place in Venezuela that can then jeopardize this relaxing of sanctions against them and open us up to secondary sanctions if we continue to do business with them? Never forget that this government, when there were serious sanctions and the borders were closed and there were serious sanctions against PDVSA and government officials, they allowed a plane to land here full of PDVSA officials, exposing us to secondary sanctions. Irresponsible decisions. Irresponsible decisions. And what we do not want is another set of irresponsible investment decisions being made, like WGTL, which would cause losses to the people of Trinidad and Tobago because of factors either within or beyond our control. And my contribution today, I'm focusing primarily on significant things which are outside of our control. So again, opening the eyes of citizens as to what is taking place will help them to evaluate the viability of this deal. And we ought not to deprive citizens of that opportunity. Mere days, in the months leading up to the finalizing of this deal and the granting of the license and the lifting of the sanctions in October and so on to allow the cash payments, what else has been happening in Venezuela? The opposition party had a primary. They had their primary to determine who will be the opposition candidate in these elections, which this deal is pegged on, these elections happening this year. The government of Venezuela refuses. They say that that was an invalid election. They do not recognize the opposition's primary election. They have imposed a ban on the person who emerged with a landslide victory in that particular election. So we are saying that we have a relief from sanctions for the government of Venezuela on the basis that they will have free and fair elections, but they refuse to recognize, and they have instituted a ban against the person who has actually emerged as the winner of the primaries in Venezuela, who is the person likely to contest the election. Are we hopeful that there are going to be free and fair elections in Venezuela in the context of that information? Because if Maria Machado continues to be unrecognized as a candidate and banned from contesting this election that is supposed to happen later in the latter half of 2024, what are the implications for our Dragon gas deal and the relief from sanctions that allows us to engage in this deal with Venezuela? What will be the position of the United States? Has the government explored all of those possibilities? What assurance can the government give to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the developments in Venezuela and how things are progressing since the conclusion of that agreement that resulted in the relief from sanctions? There have been several things that took place in Venezuela. sometime in early December, days before the big announcement that the Dragon gas deal had been concluded, 14 members of the opposition in Venezuela had arrest warrants issued for them, 3 of them being key members of the team that supports Maria Machado. So what does that say about the free and fair elections? How does it really, what is this? And again, we are setting the scene of what is playing off in Venezuela. And we have to, as it is a simple risk management exercise, because there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of damage that could be done if this deal for free and fair elections in Venezuela falls through. And I think I came across, when I was reading the Hansard, I think Senator Gopi Singh made reference to the exact same article that I found, one from Bloomberg, that said the United States is prepared to back out and to reimpose all of those sanctions if it is that the Maduro regime do not stick to their end of the deal as it comes to this plan moving forward for elections. So a lot hangs in the balance for us today. And if it is, and I think mention has been made already, and I heard in the last debate members opposite objecting to raising the issues with Guyana. Now, at that point in time, we were awaiting a decision on the dispute that had been referred to the International Court of Justice in The Hague involving Guyana and our CARICOM counterparts, our CARICOM brothers and sisters in Guyana. Again, from the date of that debate, we've been focusing on the great things that have been happening. Dragon gas deal signed off, cash payments and all of that. But are we really considering the implications of what is happening with Guyana and Venezuela? What is going to happen? Venezuela initially had said they don't even recognize the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And subsequent to the delivery of that decision, they are simply not accepting it. And while talks may be happening and CARICOM has attempted to intervene and so on and so forth, Mr. Vice President, we cannot ignore that this is another factor and another variable that can have serious consequences on this deal for Trinidad and Tobago if it is that one of our CARICOM neighbors ends up in conflict with Venezuela.
Mr. President, on a point of, Mr. Vice President, on a point of order, please. Standing Order 53-1B. This irrelevance of Guyana in this matter has been raised by multiple speakers on the last private members' day. I'm not sure if the member is going to go ad nauseum through that again.
Thank you, Senator. Upholding 53-1B, and especially in the context that a lot of progress has happened since, you might be going backwards in your deliberation. Can you proceed with your contribution, please?
Yes. Well, Mr. Vice President, whilst there might have been progress in certain areas, there are also new issues arising. That's right. There are also new issues arising. So at the last date, and I listened and I read very carefully the Hansard, we did not yet have that decision. We were awaiting the decision. So the decision having been handed down and the particular stance taken, the particular stance adopted and taken by Venezuela subsequent to our last debate and what has transpired since then is particularly relevant. And I raise it because this is not an issue that has gone away.
Yes.
So as much as the government feels that they have made significant progress from November to now in securing this deal and they're all patting each other on the back and cheering each other on and they are happy, I am simply highlighting the fact that many of the issues, the variables, the things beyond even their control and certainly beyond the control of the people of Trinidad and Tobago are still lingering. It can still endanger this particular deal. And I say all of this to say that giving the population more information, which is what this motion calls for, and asking for periodic reports to this Senate as the vehicle through which you keep a population informed. I don't know why this government is so committed to keeping people in the dark. I think that makes them feel powerful and it uplifts them in some way. But they resent accountability and they resent the opportunity to even come. That's what the parliament is for. It is to account to the people. And I don't know why they are so resentful of the opportunities given to them to do so. And they ought not to be.
Like to do wrong things.
And no right-thinking member of this Senate should be opposed to periodic updates and information given on this deal in light of everything. In light of everything, as I said, I set the scene. I set the scene of everything that is happening, everything that has happened locally. This is something that we've been talking about since 2016. The government themselves, and no less a person than the Prime Minister, described this deal as pushing a boulder up a hill. That's what he said, pushing a boulder up a hill.
Yeah.
Mr. President, we don't want to see that boulder rolling down and crushing the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Coming back on us.
And you know what is the thing about pushing a boulder up the hill? It's not just the person that's pushing, but it's also all of the external forces can push the boulder down and crush you. It can crush you. So it's not just about you and what you doing to push the boulder, because when the boulder come rolling down, it's not you alone will be crushed, it is all of us. It is all of us, and that is why this motion is so important, and that is why the call for updates and for further information and for the government to set out in specific detail the role to be played by our state-owned enterprises and so on is so important. It was a whistleblower who went to Guardian Media and had to inform the population about this risky investment that NGC was making to keep Train 1 alive and about the indemnity being sought. That is how the population get information about NGC and their expenditure. That's how it was done, and they seem to like that. They don't want to come to the parliament and account for how state enterprises spend the money. They want a whistleblower to give it to the Guardian. So if that is the preference, well, I don't know what to say, if that is the state of affairs.
It is.
We still, I believe, are a democracy. And in a democracy, you use your parliament, you use your parliamentary time, and you use all of the opportunities, whether it is through questions, motions, whatever debate it is, you use that time to give an account to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and that is all we are here to ask for today. Because, like I said, all of the other forces operating on the boulder could still bring it down the hill. You're not at the top just yet. You're not safe. Because there are too many things outside of the control of this government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago that can affect this particular deal. And I have made mention of a few of them. And Mr. Vice President, in all that has already been said, I would say the questions being put to the government are very sensible, they are very timely, they are very reasonable, and most importantly, they are in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago in order for them to make informed decisions and to evaluate this particular deal, and that is what we need. We don't need to hide in corners and whisper and wait until things don't go according to plan to then come out and say, well, okay, we'll have to restructure, we'll have to do this, we'll have to do that. Keep people informed. The other thing I just want to mention in passing as well is that, I think we've all grown up hearing the talk about you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And it's not specifically called for in this motion, but I want to mention it, that the government should also utilize its parliamentary speaking time and reporting to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to give us updates on what else we are doing to bring more gas back to our plants in Trinidad and Tobago. What are we doing? Are we just going to say, well, the dragon dancing and that's it? Because again, given the context of that deal, it cannot be that our hopes and dreams have to be pegged to this one particular deal. Where are we going? What are we doing to ensure? I read that there was the Prime Minister sat down at the opening of the energy conference yesterday and says, look, we're going to be exporting gas in 2050. Really? Where are we finding it? What's going on with the exploration? What is happening with exploration? We talk about the fact that we have mature fields and all of that, but what is happening with exploration of new fields? Have licenses been granted? How many, people lamenting, up to yesterday, people are lamenting about the slow pace of decisions and so on that affect the energy industry. Prime Minister say, well, we lackadaisical. It's a cultural problem we have. Is that good enough? Or can the government not sit down and give more facts and plans and set out its policy for developing and or redeveloping, re-energizing this very particular part of our economy?
Senator, you just have just under 5 minutes remaining.
Sure. I'm winding up. And that's all I really wanted to say about that aspect of it. It's not part of this motion, but I would encourage the government to not simply use its time outside the parliament to pat itself on the back about concluding this deal when everything to the casual observer and even some very informed observers seem to be far from concluded when it comes to this deal. Do we have contingency measures in place in the event that some of all of those variables that I set out, all of those things that could happen? What are the contingency plans? What are the measures? How are we trying to mitigate against all of the risks that can be posed to this deal from all of the external factors and external forces? That's a simple question. And I don't expect them to have all the answers because it's a developing situation. Things are changing all the time. But what all we want and what the people of this country deserve is an update. It's an acknowledgement that things can happen and that we are addressing our minds to it. Because sometimes I feel that things that are, patently obvious that could happen, it's like it escapes this government and then they all, running around trying to fix something that we could have foreseen. We can foresee a lot of the problems. Because in this entire debate, you're hearing everybody setting them out. And so how are you going to mitigate against those risks? What are your contingency plans? How are you going to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago in this particular deal? And that's what we, again, I say, as a responsible opposition, we have brought a sensible, timely, and reasonable motion seeking answers, seeking information, and in the spirit of freedom of information, and to honor those who have done so much to provide clarity, to provide information, to open the filing cabinets of every government institution and allow people access to information to make informed decisions. I call upon the members of this Senate to support this motion. I thank you.